Something that happens to writers when we do a lot of research is that we come away from that with a lot of information. And then we have to figure out what exactly we can use, what we should use, and what is just irrelevant and we should get rid of. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about how not to overload your novel with a bunch of useless information. What should you use and what should you throw away?
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Amante. I'm a women's fiction author and also here on Fridays to give you some writing tips. Okay, so today let's talk about research. One of the things that we all have to do is we all have to research a little bit. We have maybe some dates or just some information that we need to get to make our character's job sound believable or a location sound believable, or maybe we just need to find out a few things. My hair is acting kind of weird today. But what can happen to us is that sometimes we have so much information that we start to pour that into our novel without meaning to. We just think we're being descriptive or that we are helping the reader to understand something. But what it's really doing is it's slowing down our story. It's creating just too much of a roadblock, and we're getting away from the actual story of what's happening, and we are adding a bunch of details that the writer does not need to, that the reader does not need to know. Okay, so what I want to share with you is that I'm currently going through that, where the novel that I'm writing requires me to do a lot of research of the past, right? From 1960s, 1970s, what life was like, what the political atmosphere was like, which was a disaster. Similar to now, and so I'm thinking, okay, well, how much of this atmosphere should I include in the story? How much of the details should I include? What is important and what is not important? And so what I'd like to do is explain a little bit about how I'm going through, how I'm weeding through all this stuff, and then give you a few pointers on what you should do when you are researching, when you do have, a huge stack of information that you found, and how to weave that in a good way, in a way that's going to be, it's not going to detract from the story, but it's going to help the reader to understand your story better. Okay, the first tip is to avoid adding too much information. You're thinking, well, of course, right? Let me explain that a little bit more. Okay, the information that you are adding, for me, I want to make sure that it serves at least two purposes. Okay, so if I'll give you an example. One of the things that, because the story that I'm writing is based on my parents' events from their life, so I'm reading some letters and things that I have from him. And one of the things that he did was that he moved all the time. I mean, this man had so many addresses. He just moved one letter he's living in this address, the next letter he's living in a different address, and he moved around all the time. Do I need to include that? Is that something that my character in the story should do? Well, yes and no. I don't need to include every single time that this character moves. It's just to give the feeling of his personality. So the reason I would include that information is, one, it helps me to characterize the character. The character who is, again, not my father, but based on some of the things that happened with him, right? So one of the things I want to do is to show this personality of sort of this a very unsettled person who saw opportunities everywhere, but some of these opportunities shouldn't be acted upon. He's very impulsive, and so it does help me to characterize the character. The other thing is it helps to move. So I'm not including every single move, but I'm including major moves. When he's moving from, one state to another state, well then, yes, because part of the events that are going to happen are going to be in this new state. So I'm including what is relevant, in other words, okay? And it has to either serve the plot, serve the character. It has to have more than one reason why you're including that detail. So if you're describing something, if you're describing a building that was at a certain place, or is there, do you have to include everything about it? Probably not. Just to kind of give, again, just a feeling for the place, what it looks like, and that's about it. You don't need to include everything about it. You don't have to have every description, describe everything that's there. So better to have less than to have too much information. And the information you have, you should have a very good reason on why you're including it. It has to move your story forward. It shouldn't just be sitting there because you learned about it. So second thing, if you tend to include a lot of information, if you tend to overwrite, that's okay. Do it, because if that's the way that you write it and it makes you feel like, okay, I'm including I'm not leaving anything out, then the second thing that I suggest is that you delete well. That you're very good at deleting details. So take things out that afterwards, when you're finished and you're going through your editing process, ask yourself these questions like, why is this here? Why am I including? How is this moving the story forward? Is it characterizing? Is it moving the plot forward? Is it adding details that are important for later in the future? So be good at taking things out. Take things out that are unnecessary, that are slowing your pace, that are slowing your story down. Okay, the third thing that I want to say is that you don't want to front load your information or your facts. So you do want to have an opening chapter that includes information about your character and what's happening and what is that opening scene? What is the conflict? What is the struggle? However, you don't want everything in that first chapter. You don't have to let us know who all your characters are. You don't have to, you don't have to have everything in the first chapter. So there's four things that I want to, make sure that you remember. The first thing is that you don't want to introduce all your characters at once. Okay, so some characters don't really need to be introduced immediately. They can come in later if they're secondary characters, just the ones that are crucial to opening the story, that are involved maybe in the conflict. The second thing is that don't go into too many details about the problem and the conflict. We want to introduce the conflict. We don't want to explain everything about the conflict. So let's say that your character gets fired. Okay, perfect. That lets us know that there's going to be a change in that character's life, that there's going to be a problem she's going to have to deal with. But we don't have to go about all the reasons in the background and everything. That can come later. We can talk about it later on what led to this person being fired. It doesn't have to be all, and it shouldn't be all on that in that first chapter. Okay, and the third thing is don't have a lot of descriptions of setting at the beginning. So we do want to orient the reader. We do want to let them know where the character is. The character's in LA, in Los Angeles. Okay, fine. Create that image, that picture of the character being in Los Angeles without describing everything about Los Angeles. We don't need to know what all the buildings are. We don't need to know everything, right? Just a little image that lets us know where the character is as you start at the beginning of your story. Okay, and the fourth thing is you don't want to go into a bunch of backstory at the beginning either. Okay, so we don't need to know the whole history or the whole background of the character. We don't need to go into, the family, all of that stuff. Beginning of the story is just really just to let the reader know who the character is, what is the ordinary life like, what is the character, what is the problem, what's the inciting incident that's going to change this character's life. Again, this is just the opening, right? It's just the beginning. So one of the problems here is that people try to add too much information to that first chapter. They just front load all the details at the beginning. And really the reader doesn't care about that yet. They don't really care about the character enough to want to know about all the backstory and all the background. So avoid those four things when you're opening. Don't put all the information into that first chapter. Save it to weave it into the rest of your story as you move forward. So let's just review for a second. We're not going to add too much information unless it has a purpose in the story. We're going to delete information that doesn't belong there, that isn't moving your story forward, and we're not going to front load all the information into that first chapter. Okay, the third thing that we want, or the fourth thing that we want to do, is we want to make sure that we are thinking of pacing always. Pacing is very important because it's what keeps readers reading. As soon as the story slows down or things aren't happening, then that's when the reader loses interest. So we want to make sure that we are keeping the pace going. Something is always happening. If we do need to slow down every once in a while, we need to have those sequel scenes where the character is making new decisions based on what just happened, but it's always happening. There's never, they're not just hanging out at a park or doing nothing. They have to be doing something. Something has to be happening all the time. So make sure that you're remembering that the pacing is there. If I add a scene that has too much information, too much description, and it's not moving my story forward, then I need to change that. Okay, so I need to always be aware of pacing. Okay, and then the fifth thing, the last thing that I want to mention is that information is great. All those facts and all that research that you've done is great, and you do want to add that in there, but it's always best when it's just kind of sprinkled in there so that it's not taking up massive space in your novel. That's what slows it down. That's what makes that pacing go off, right? But if we just sprinkle it in, if we add little details here and there, if we show the character doing something that's important for the plot, but we're also adding some facts, throwing in some reality, right? Some actual street names, some actual information, some data, then it's much more interesting and it makes it more realistic too, so that the character isn't just running down the street chasing the bad guy, but the character is running down a specific street that has a name, turning in certain places, right? So that again, it just brings the reader into the story. They can situate themselves better. The more specific you are, the better it is, but it's not long descriptions of stuff. So think about sprinkling in that information. Think about all that research that you've done. It's like, okay, I can add that to this scene. I can add this part to this scene. I don't want to add too much. I can always bring it back, right? So if your character is a doctor, you don't have to have long paragraphs about them performing an operation or something, right? You want to just say, okay, he's going into surgery, and the next time maybe something else is doing. Maybe he takes off or he has a certain instrument that he uses. But you put that stuff in there as you're going through the story, and it makes it sound really good, it makes it sound realistic, and it shows that you've done your research, but it's not overloading it. Okay, so I hope that this is helpful for you. Research it can be a lot of fun for some people. For some people, it's like, oh, I don't really want to do the research, I just want to write the story. But if you do like researching, I think you can fall into sort of that trap of adding too many details and too much information. So just be careful with that. Remember that it's always about the story, and that the information is just there to make your story life feel like real life. Okay, so again, if this has been helpful, please hit the like, share button and hit the subscribe button so that you will be notified next Friday when the next video comes up, and I will see you then.